Hello, everybody. So welcome all. So today we are going to have a session on, public speaking and how best you can leverage it for your EB1A expertise. And we have with us today with Sarah, one of the best coaches for this particular purpose. She has been a TED speaker. She runs her own podcast. And there is so much to learn, actually. Thank you very much, Sarah, for accepting our invitation today.
Thank you, Ranjeet, and thank you everyone for having me here. I'm so happy. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, Sarah, we had circulated some that the fact that you are coming to us and for the session, and we asked a few of the people actually that please let us know some questions, and we got tons of questions. Actually, we may not be able to take all of them, at least 50 to 60 questions, and we would just kind of go with the flow and let's see how it goes. And I know you have very exciting videos to show us. You have an exciting, responses, and I think a lot to learn for all of us today here. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Great. So, Sarah, let's start with one very basic question that, we at the Next League conduct a program that helps people to become the best version of themselves and kind of transformation process that elevates a person to help them to apply for EB1A Green Card, which is reserved for very talented individuals. Now, how do you see, a public speaking as a, not necessarily as a profession, but as an art or as a subject, contribute to achieving or applying for EB1A Green Card by itself?
Thank you. That's a great question. So as I understand it, an EB1A Green Card is for those with extraordinary ability, right? And I suppose you can have extraordinary ability and not tell anyone about it, not tell the world, right? But having a stage, a venue, whether that's a virtual venue or actual in-person face-to-face presentation, you can share your ideas with the world, right? So it seems, that it makes a lot of sense. These things go hand in hand. If you have something to share with the world, if you have a contribution in your field, whether it's big or small, putting it into something, such as a TED Talk. It doesn't have to be a TED Talk, of course, but putting it into a well-formed talk, a well-structured talk with some good storytelling, some engaging moments with the audience, people will remember your ideas. They're more likely to remember your ideas. And just going back to the EB1A principle or the guidelines, having something in a showcase, having that work that you've contributed to your field in a showcase for a more general audience is going to help you on that journey to get your green card.
Absolutely. No, there is a specific criteria called showcase which is normally reserved for artists and other professionals, but very rarely people from sciences, arts, engineering have been using it. But yes, definitely we have had interaction with a couple of legal experts in this particular field, and they did mention that this can be used. Now the whole challenge is how do we use it very effectively? That's the whole idea. And that's what we are going to learn today, actually, here. So, Sarah, I think when we talk of public speaking engagements, there are various kinds and various forms. We talk about, podcast. We speak about, doing at a stage or somebody else's forum. It could be in form of an interview. Now, let's start with a very basic thing, for the benefit of all of us. What is a podcast? Today we are interviewing, there is an audience here. We'll pick up some questions from the audience. Is it an interview format? What is essentially a podcast? It could be audio, it could be video. So
that's a great, good question.
Yeah, please help us understand that.
Well, I'll try to start at the basic foundational level. Although I'm sure most of you know what a podcast is or have listened to podcasts, but basically it's just it's a talk program, like a radio talk program, but it is on demand, right? So we get our podcasts, we get these talk programs in streaming services. So, whenever it's convenient for the listener, right? So that's how it's different from radio talk show. But a podcast can be so many different things. It doesn't have to be an interview format. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the host and they have a different guest every week. Some podcasts are just someone speaking and sharing their wisdom because they might be an expert, like an attorney in a certain field, and they want to share their wisdom, and that's sometimes how they get their clients. A podcast can also be fiction. You know, if you are a fiction writer, you can release each chapter week by week. So a podcast can be a lot of different things. A podcast for your journey on the EB1A Green Card, trying to obtain a green card, is a great way to establish a platform. Now, if you've ever written a book, or if you wanted to write a book, you might have heard this term platform, where you're building an audience, right? And so I think many of us know that that's kind of the way things are going these days, in terms of you build an audience as a creative person, and then you write your book, and then you have a book, then you find your publisher. So as far as having a venue to speak on, a podcast is a great way. You establish it yourself, you kind of have control over it, and then whatever your field is, whatever you're researching, perhaps you are on the cutting edge of something, perhaps you know something that others don't know. It's a really great way to help you stand apart from your peers, especially if you're doing extra research. Like, you might be just doing something at work, where you're learning, but then at home you're researching, or kind of like in your own time, you're researching even deeper and wider. And so sharing that in a podcast session, or even having guests on your show who are in your field, can be a great way to network, to meet people, but also a great way to showcase, just using the terminology, to showcase what it is you have, what makes you stand out, right? So it's a great way to make you stand out. That's a good question.
Wonderful. So you are saying that participating in somebody else's podcast to showcase your expertise, as well as having an ability to create your own podcast in your expertise, could determine or establish you as an expert. Is it a good way to do that?
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize. Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it.
Wonderful. So I think that's a wonderful thing. So many of you, I think, who want to demonstrate your expertise, if you have something to showcase, if you have some, there are other elements of becoming or successfully applying for a green card. So EB1A Green Card, so if you're talking about showcasing your original contribution, which is one of the criteria, this could also not only help you to position yourself as an expert, but also help you to fulfill as one of the criteria itself as well, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
I just
beauty. Yeah,
want to add one thing. Yeah. I mean, the podcasting world is growing and growing. And I know it seems like everybody has a podcast these days, but it's an absolutely wonderful way for you to find other people in your field that you might not even know are out there, to find your listeners. But it's also a good idea to see who people need interviewees all the time. They need guests on their show. So just making yourself available so you don't have to do all the work of the podcast, Ranjeet, that's a really good suggestion, is just finding those podcasts where they're always looking for guests.
really wonderful. Now, what are the key elements of, now we are going into actually the speaking engagement now here. What are the key elements of successful speaking engagement that could, potentially, let's use the word, captivate the audience? I mean, and create a long, sort of lasting impact.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go over three things here. There's a lot to cover when it comes to those key elements. Being prepared and knowing your stuff, knowing your material beforehand is always key. Like, I don't ever want to ignore that. That is so important. But I think what really but a lot of speakers are prepared, right? Like, there's a lot of speakers out there, a lot of people talking. Being prepared is not going to have that long lasting engagement. What's going to have that making a connection with the audience means being authentic. So bringing something that only you have, like, that's unique to your own story, your own field of research, whatever it is that you're working on, perhaps as an artist, and being authentic and almost vulnerable with the audience so that there's a chance to connect with them. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about ending world hunger or if you're talking about, a better workflow as a manager, as a project manager. If you connect with the audience, whether that's through humor or, just telling them something kind of embarrassing about yourself so they connect with you, they are going to remember that, because that long-lasting connection that you're talking about achieving, Ranjeet, they are going to remember how you made them feel, and hopefully because of that, they're going to remember your content as well. But first and foremost, we remember how we connected with those speakers. So I would say sorry, I got off track. Preparedness, authenticity, so bringing your unique thing, and then just being vulnerable with the audience, just being able to open up. It doesn't matter how technical your topic is, but being able to open up and connect with your audience is hands down the most important element of public speaking, in my opinion.
Wonderful. Now, here comes a very important point, actually, from my side. Now, you mentioned that, connection and vulnerability, these are the two aspects. But at the same time, guys, will have to mute. Okay. So, here in this particular case, when we talk of vulnerability and connection, we are also trying to establish our authority. Now, is there a balance that one has to maintain? Because if I have to establish myself, should I be looking upon myself or coming from a position of authority while I'm talking and communicating something vis-a-vis trying to be vulnerable and yet connecting? Now, isn't there a kind of a paradox between the two?
I think you can do both at the same time. I don't think there's any reason, because you're coming maybe in terms of your intelligence and your knowledge, you might be kind of a giant in your field, right? You're way up here. I think if that's the case, it's even more important for you to meet your audience where they are and say, hey, there was a point at which, I was just a lowly intern at this company. Maybe even just something like that. But now here I am, and that way, we can see how you've worked your way up and respect you for your hard work, but at the same time, connect with you like, oh, okay, they weren't always in this position. They didn't always have all this knowledge. So to me, it's, I don't think it's a paradox at all. I don't think these are conflicting things, but that's a good point. Yeah.
But that's wonderful. Now, I think I have another question here is, what role does tone, accent, and flow play in delivering an engaging and effective address or a speech, whatever we call it?
Yeah, there's an opportunity at the beginning of any talk where, it's the first 10 to 30 seconds. And this is the case if you've ever been a teacher, the same thing. You establish decorum in your classroom, establishing the tone of your talk. So if you're going to have a talk where you want people to really focus and kind of get serious, starting out in a very quiet and intentional manner, like very calm, say there was a speech right before you're at a conference and, the audience was up, they're up and they're clapping and they're kind of talking. If you lower your voice a little bit and they have to kind of lean in, you set the tone, right? So you want to set the tone. You want to have that power, control over the audience, over the situation. And that will change just those first 10 to 30 seconds. If you can be very intentional about that, it's going to really work in your favor. As far as the flow, to me, that's a preparedness issue, meaning like you have to be really prepared in order to know how one topic is going to flow to the next and to the next. And Ranjeet, I know you and I talked about this before, but that from data to information to knowledge to skill and to wisdom, I may have gotten those, kind of flipped.
Data, information, skill, knowledge, and wisdom. Yeah.
Skill,
knowledge,
yeah, and wisdom, yeah. But having that flow, from one to the next and knowing where you're going, it's invisible to the audience, right? They know they're flowing with you, they're going with you, but they don't realize how much, preparation you had to put into that to be able to kind of flow along with it. Because sometimes there are speeches that you might do where you have to memorize every sentence, every word. And then there are different kinds of speeches where it's conversational, but you want to hit this point, this point, this point, and this point. You're not going to be able to flow from one to the next unless you've created transitions in there that you can follow. So that's what I would suggest for the flow. But establishing tone at the beginning and being prepared so you can flow from beginning, middle to end will make you so much more confident in your talk.
Absolutely. I guess you have sent a video for this particular purpose on by one monk actually. So
Yeah.
do you want me to play that for an example?
Yes, and this, if you'll just keep in mind that, I want to touch on some of the things he does based on the question you just asked, but then also I have some things to add. He does so many great things in this talk. So
Okay.
yes.
So guys, I'm playing a video which is actually for 10 minutes, and we will try to fast track it for the paucity of time. And in case you are interested, it's a beautiful video and you will see it for yourself. So let's begin this. It's on how to focus your mind.
Is actually how do we focus our minds? This focus of the mind is actually very important for success in the world and in spiritual life also. Swami Vivekananda said, the difference between an ordinary person and a great person lies in the degree of concentration. And he himself had extraordinary powers of concentration. So focus of the mind is necessary for anything and everything in life. Now, the yogic approach, the Raja Yoga or Patanjali Yoga approach, that is the science of concentration par excellence. In fact, in modern positive psychology, they have studied this, focus of mind, concentration. One psychologist said that the quality of your life depends on how much you can concentrate and what you concentrate on. Not just how much you can concentrate, what you concentrate on. Actually, this lady who wrote the book Rapt, R-A-P-T, Rapt, she's talking about a cancer patient who suffered a lot and decided that she would not keep her mind on suffering anymore because it's inevitable that suffering is going to come. Rather, she's going to devote her mind to her art or writing, I think. And as she learned to do that, she found the quality of her life became better. In fact, subjectively, she was happier than before cancer. So she says that what you think about. So am I thinking about my writing and art, or am I thinking about the pain and the cancer and the co-payments and so on? What am I thinking of? Where do I put my mind? And how much of the mind I can put on that? Milton said in Paradise Lost, the mind in its own place can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. So it has been studied. A classic book in this regard is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's Flow. You're aware of that book? Yeah. So he has studied this phenomenon of attention and its link with the quality of life. And in fact, he mentions Patanjali Yoga there. He says, the best methodology that I have seen for attainment of flow is in this ancient technique of Patanjali Yoga. Yeah. Am I audible to everybody? Yes. So that's one method by Patanjali Yoga. That's the method of concentration, where you train your mind to think of one thing and keep on excluding everything else, bringing your mind back to that thing again and again. And there's a whole science in it. In fact, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, there he points it out, that it's basically a function of two things. One is the challenge posed by the environment, and other is your skill. It's he gives an example. Suppose you're playing tennis. When you begin to play tennis, it's a great thing just to return a serve. That Swami, when I close my eyes, all sorts of disturbance within. All sorts of thoughts, restlessness within. And when I open my eyes, not what I can do for you, what can I get from you? So this is just the opposite of spirituality. This is worldliness. So unselfishness, to the extent that we can be unselfish, to that extent mind will be relaxed and better focused. The focus which comes out of selfishness is a narrow band focus, which leads to unpleasantness and tension and frustration. Another insight. Love leads to focus. So what I love, my mind automatically is drawn to that and easily focused without all sorts of techniques. You don't have to do this breathing technique, this thing and that thing. It automatically leads to focus there. So for example, then the mind remains calm and steady, like the unflickering flame. Look at the mind of that prince, the story of the princess of Kashi. The mind of the prince was disturbed and agitated. You will smile and say, unnecessarily so. For what? But that's exactly our condition. Unnecessarily so. For what? One Swami put it very funnily. He said, before we come to Advaita, our reaction to the world is, what? And after we get Advaita, our reaction is, so what? So that calmness, that relaxed, focused attitude, steady attitude comes from that. That is no mind. No mind is not thinking, not shutting down the mind. That is no mind. So these are some of the ways. If you have, those who are discerning, you would have seen, I basically talked about Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. Yeah, these are the ways. Thank you. Oh.
Yes, sir. So you're on mute.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just unmuting. Yeah, so that was wonderful. In terms of flow, it made me think of, and I know we didn't watch the whole thing, but in terms of organization, I really admire a speaker who can do that, because he basically he talks about this woman, the author of Wrapped, and then he goes, just elegantly, right into I think he talks next about Milton. He has a quote from Milton, and then he's talking about flow. And then he stays there for a little bit. He's talking about the book Flow, and he gives, a quote from there, and then an example, and then he talks about the yoga and this. So it makes me think of like a really well organized desktop on a computer. Like you open the folder and then you see, it flows from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. So he does a really good job of flow there. There's some other things, and I think I'll wait for you to ask the next question, Ranjeet, but I do at some point want to talk about body language, even his body language. So I'll refer back to that if we talk about that later.
Absolutely. In fact, that was my next question, actually, that how important is body language during any speaking, and what techniques can be used to enhance, as kind of a non-verbal communications or non-verbal cues, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So great. Wonderful.
Video also. Is it for that question or is it general, actually?
Oh, yeah. So I want to do this next video for this question, but let me just talk about it real quick.
Absolutely.
So for instance, like with his body language is very, it's authentic to him. The speaker that we just saw, I cannot pronounce his name, but the Swami that we just saw, this is his thing. He's on brand, right? He's calm. He doesn't do, he uses his hands to gesture, but he's very comfortable. You can see his shoulders are comfortable. And so his body language is appropriate to his talk. He's also on, he's online, or at least we're watching him online, but he's also in a live audience. So being in a live audience, you're going to have different body language. But even when you're just a little square, you're just a little face in a square, you can't discount the power of body language. even on a podcast, sometimes that kind of thing, whether you're comfortable in your body or not, comes across in your voice. So keep that in mind when you're, preparing for any kind of speaking engagement, even if you're just on, on the radios. But yes, and now I want you guys to take a look at this. It's a TED Talk, a very short TED Talk. He doesn't say much, and he'll show you. It's very funny, but he definitely shows you exactly how to express yourself where people will watch. So we'll talk about. I'd love to hear from you guys about like what you think of this talk. It's a good one.
Let's play that, and I just need to kind of share this with a voice. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is a 5-minute. We'll play entire one.
Ranjeet, can you expand the screen? Thank you.
Hear that? That's nothing. Which is what I, as a speaker at today's conference, have for you all. I have nothing. Nada. Zip. Zilch. Zippo. Nothing smart. Nothing inspirational. Nothing even remotely researched at all. I have absolutely nothing to say whatsoever. And yet, through my manner of speaking, I will make it seem like I do. Like what I am saying is brilliant. And maybe, just maybe, you will feel like you've learned something. Now, I'm going to get started with the opening. I'm going to make a lot of hand gestures. I'm going to do this with my right hand. I'm going to do this with my left. I'm going to adjust my glasses. And then I'm going to ask you all a question. By show of hands, how many of you all have been asked a question before? Okay, great. I'm seeing some hands. And again, I have nothing here. Now, I'm going to react to that and act like I'm telling you a personal anecdote. Something to break the tension, something to endear myself a little bit, something kind of embarrassing. And you guys are going to make an awe sound. It's true. It really happened. And now I'm going to bring it to a broader point. I'm going to reel you back in. I'm going to make it intellectual. I'm going to bring it to this man right here. Now, what this man did was important, I'm sure. But I, for one, have no idea who he is. I simply Google image the word scientist. And now, you see, I'd like it to seem like I'm making points, building an argument, inspiring you to change your life, when in reality, this is just me buying time. Now, if you don't believe me, let's take a look at the numbers. This is a real thing that's happening right now. The number of talks that I'm giving is 1. Interesting facts imparted thus far in said talk, well, that's going to be a 0. My height in inches is 70.5. Note the 0.5 there. 2 times 6 equals 12. And then interestingly enough, 6 times 2 also equals 12. That's math. 352 is a 3-digit number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then almost immediately following that, we get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, to add more filler here, I'm going to give you a couple more numbers to consider. 18, 237, 5,601, 2.6 million, 4, 24, staggering. These are real numbers, all of them. And to follow that up, let's take a look at some graphs. Now, if you take a look at this pie chart, what you're going to see is that the majority far exceeds the minority. Everybody see that? Cool, isn't it? And let's take a look at this bar graph because it shows similarly irrelevant data. Now, I'm doing this because I'd like to make it seem like I've done my homework. If you were, say, watching this on YouTube with the sound off, you might think, huh, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. But I don't. I'm floundering, panicking, I've got nothing. I'm a total and utter phony. But you know what? I was offered a TED Talk. And damn it, I'm going to see it through. Now, if you take a look behind me, these are just words paired with vaguely thought-provoking stock photos. I'm going to point at them like I'm making use both of my time as well as your time, but in reality, I don't know what half of them mean. And now, as these continue, I'm just going to start saying gibberish. Wagga wah, gabba gabba, turkey, mouth in a mouth, chip, trip, my dog Skip. Rip it and dip it, Richard. I'm an itty-bitty baby bopper, and I'm hungry in my tum-tum. Brad Pitt, Uma Thurman. Names, things, words, and more things. And see, it feels like it might make sense, doesn't it? Like maybe, just maybe, I'm building to some sort of satisfying conclusion. I mean, I'm gesticulating as though I am. I'm pacing, I'm growing in intensity, I'm taking off my glasses, which, by the way, are just frames. I wore them to look smart, even though my vision is perfect. And now I'm going to slow things down a little bit. I'm going to change the tone. I'm going to make it seem like I'm building to a moment. And what if I was? Amazing, isn't it? What can you do? Life's a roller coaster. You know, if there's one thing you take away from my talk, I'd like you to think about what you heard at the beginning, and I'd like you to think about what you hear now. Because it was nothing, and it's still nothing. Think about that. Or don't, that's fine. And now I'm going to stop talking. Thank you.
You know, Sarah, thank you for showing this to us. The most interesting part here is that what I'm seeing is that the tone of the previous speaker and this speaker is absolutely the same. You can map them together, actually.
That's interesting. Oh my gosh, yeah.
I was just watching this and I was seeing both of them were absolutely the same.
That's so funny.
Looks so
Yeah, it occurs to me that this guy has seen way too many TED Talks. But that's the brilliance of it. It's the irony is that at the beginning he says, you're not going to learn anything in this talk. But the truth is, as a non-native speaker, I think you learn so much. I think all of us can learn something, right? Especially if you're new to giving talks like this, because there is a certain pacing, there's a certain rhythm, there's a cadence to a good TED speaker, right? And so a lot of the things that we're talking about today, whether that's tone, gesticulating, using our hands, pacing is one thing in progress. We haven't really brought it up yet, but he does a brilliant job of pacing. So again, like he's saying, we're not learning any information, but you can learn a lot by just watching that over and over again, because I'm sure you guys probably have some brilliant share with the world. You actually have content. And so to take your content and to just kind of like put it into that template, it would be a great, just a little takeaway today, it's just to watch that talk. He also uses repetition, right? And he says to us, this, it seems like this guy knows what he's talking about if you had the sound down, so if you turned it off. So, and that's a really good point. I had forgotten about that, but this is one of the tips that we would talk about all the time to our TED speakers. Watch a good TED Talk, a compelling TED Talk with no sound, and just do what they do. Obviously find somebody that connects with you and connects with your type of, kind of like your identity, and see that what are the things that they do, and how do they kind of move? How are they open? What's their posture? So learning body language, it's almost like it can't be taught. I mean, I can tell you all kinds of things in words, but body language can be learned much better by observing, just watching talk after talk after talk. So yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think about that. It was so funny. Vaishali says that was a brilliant talk. Yeah.
Absolutely. Guys, I will just take a pause here. And are there any questions anybody would like to ask or like to DM me? Just let me. Anybody would like to just raise your hands? Bharat?
Yeah, I would like to know, what kind of role will eye contact play when you're giving a public talk? Like, should we maintain eye contact with one particular row in the audience, or should we have to like just gaze around when you're talking about certain things? I know body language is one of the important part, but eye contact plays an important role as well, right? So,
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say that it depends on your audience, but some of the tricks that we would do with a big audience, right, is that you find a few different people around the audience. And sometimes it's best that they're not like your best friend or your family member, because then you might start giggling. But just to find a few different faces that look empathetic, that is really helpful. Or even if they might just be nodding, and not really paying attention, but it can help you to have that face, and you have one maybe on the right side, on the left side, and in front, so that you're kind of looking. It seems like you're maintaining eye contact with the different parts of the audience. These are some things that we learned in terms of person presentations for our TED speakers. It gets a little, it gets different when you're online. It's so funny. It's like, where do we look when we're on a screen? It's always hard to know. Like, I try to look at the faces of the people who are talking. And then when I'm talking, I try to look in the camera, but it doesn't feel as natural as to me. I need to look at faces. So there that's almost like a whole different session where we talk about doing certain things for an online venue. But that's a great question.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bharat. Thank you, Sarah. Any other question, guys?
Yeah, actually. First of all, thank you guys for holding this event. So I've spoke before on a couple of stages, and I was wondering how, if an audience, I guess, doesn't really respond to, I guess, like any jokes probably wasn't funny, but to like any jokes that you throw out there, or try and like in any way interact with them, or maybe there's one person that's just not really like getting involved, what would be the best way to either physically or verbally get them involved? Like, for example, like making everyone stand up, or like some form of interaction. What would you say is the best way to, I'd say, an audience of around 50 to 100?
Hmm. So I think the best way, if you're not comfortable, if you're not absolutely confident that your joke is going to land, if you want to, because connecting with humor is great. That is, if that's a talent of yours, great. But if you're not confident in that, questions, especially for a small audience like that, like 40 or 50 people, having some questions, like yes or no questions, where people can raise their hands and they can get engaged and they can feel like they're a part of the conversation. And this can be on an online venue as well. You can, instead of taking a bunch of, particular questions, you can do a poll. But I think you asked in person, so even better in person. So when people can raise their hands, you can even say, how many of you, how many of you here today, had to ride the train here? It doesn't necessarily even have to be a part of your talk. It's just so you can get their attention. And then you can even respond to them, like, because if maybe only half of the crowd raise their hand, you can say things like, are you guys here? Are you awake? Hello. I mean, without being too naggy, but that's without, you may have like a very technical talk. So just kind of like getting into it by engaging with them with these questions that they can answer yes or no is always helpful, I think. And then also asking, if it is a little bit more technical, or it's, right in your field of research, just asking them, are you familiar with this? Are you familiar with this concept? And how much, did you know this, or did you know that? Like kind of starting with a little trivia about your field is fun.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
I think there is a very interesting thing that we observed, that even in the monk's talk, there was a humor also he had induced.
Mm-hmm.
When he said that, when we close our eyes, we wonder, and when I think something like, so what and what, actually, when he said,
Yeah.
the way he said that, there was humor. And also he did ask, and while everything was going fine, just to connect with people once again, to ensure that people are awake, there was a question, can you hear me? I mean, am I audible? So I think even at his own way, in his own imitable style, he has done it actually. Yeah. So that's what I said, that the first part, both the things, what you're saying, every element of a good podcast, of a good public address is being covered by both of these guys actually.
Yeah, and I think you can't discount pacing. Pacing is, and he was great at that as well. But when he, I mean, that's what humor is, right? You have to have good pacing for humor. And he said, when you close your eyes, it's what, and when you open your eyes, it's so what. And he was just good with landing that. We wouldn't call it a joke, but it's humor. It's, he's connecting with us. So yeah, that's a great point.
Absolutely. And before we ask Ruby question, I have one point actually in terms of, we just mentioned that for online, of course, we are going to do a lot more sessions on that. But one of the basic limitations, like we are having interactions today right now, is we are all seated, frozen in front of our cameras. Only thing we can move is our faces and maybe hand movement a little bit here. Now, how do we effectively, would you suggest as a professional trainer or a coach, that we create an environment around us where we can stand, we can kind of interact with people, or make ourselves at home more comfortable with the audience essentially? So how would you say about that if I'm addressing to an audience, or even during one-on-one meetings with people?
Yeah. I mean, that brings up all sorts of different technical issues just because this is the way people are set up. They're set up at their desks. But I think it's a great, I think it's something that we should play with, because you can certainly set yourself up in your desk, in your office with a standing desk, or with a lavalier mic, right on your shirt, so you can walk around and move around as long as it's not distracting to the audience. But you can kind of like lean on your desk if you're standing up, and you can really convey a lot more energy that way. In fact, in our sessions, one thing I haven't told you, Ranjeet, yet, but I like to do improv improv games. I don't know if any of you are familiar with improv, but that's some of my background is in improvisational theater. And we do get up. So I'm hoping that in these sessions that we have, we will be able to kind of prepare for it beforehand so that we can all stand up and get comfortable in our space, right? Like be able to like stretch out a little bit more because we're all compressed into these little boxes. But it does take some thinking beforehand, especially if you're going to do a talk that way. If you've decided you're going to do a talk where you stand up, you need to make sure that you're in the right place for the camera, maybe have a little spot on the floor where you have to stay in this spot, kind of like if you've seen the TED stage, you have to stay in a TED circle, the red circle. So there's little tricks for that kind of thing where you kind of change it up so you're not just a talking head.
Yeah, sure. Before we move to our next question, I will ask Ruby to ask question.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I have experience in public speaking, but how can we get invited to give TED Talks?
That's a great question. Any local TED Talk. So if you see a TED Talk online, which a lot of the really big ones online that get really popular are TEDx. The X stands for local, and I'm sure you've heard of these. You may have one in your own town. But these are typically open to any applicant. So what you can do, like for instance, I live in Jacksonville, Florida. So we have TEDx Jacksonville. They're going to open their applications here coming up in May, and they're going to be due by the end of July. And then they pick their speakers for November. Now, every TEDx event has a different application process. They have different deadlines. But if you look up, just Google your own city, maybe you live on Toronto, TEDx Los Angeles, and most cities have multiple TED conferences. That's a great way to get started. Some of these TED audiences, these TEDx audiences are huge. So I would do some research to see which ones are bigger, which ones are well recorded. Like if you see a really good recording, I know that TEDx Jacksonville does an amazing job with curating their talks, but that's a good way to get started. In your field, there's speaking engagements that you can, like corporate speaking engagements, nonprofits a lot of times. So, say you work in technology, or say you work, but you have a certain, you kind of have a certain passion for helping kids, right? Helping kids who are suffering from poverty. And so maybe you have a nonprofit group in your town and they put on conferences, they put on events, and just getting started there is a good way. But TEDx is a good way to go.
Absolutely. And if you think you're an established speaker and if you have something, I just have something to share with you for a moment, and you can try this out. It is simply here, speaking at TED, FAQ speaking. There's a speaker nomination form. You can nominate somebody, get yourself nominated by your company or something. You can try this. This is TED.com. So
yeah.
So you have all opportunities available to you. So it is not that you can grow organically, but yes, I mean, many people do ask us that, okay, how do I make a TED talk? But yes, before you do that, I'm sure that you need to be at least making 100 talks. And this doing a TEDx event at least gives you a leverage, at least it showcases. I mean, while there could be 10-20% of the TED speakers who would not have given TED talks, but they would have given other similar talks, which would be similar to TED, or they would be nominated by somebody. You need to be really good at it. So I think that answers your question, Ruby, and for the benefit of everybody who wants to kind of approach TED. So Vaishali, you are next.
Thanks, Ranjeet. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for
Hi.
this, very exciting things, and your tips are very valuable. I'll come quickly to the point. So typically when you have audience, you're speaking to someone, that's one kind of talks, but there are some talks where you have to record something. You are just the speaker and there's nothing in front of you. Either you send that to someone or something. It gets so difficult. Like recently someone asked me to record my introduction, and that's the first time in my life when I took 15 takes. Because every time I spoke, I found that I stopped, or I thought if I have to read, then I have to look somewhere, which may not be okay. Although it was just about my self introduction, I found it really difficult, which is not the case. I can speak, I mean, in public, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
But when it comes to recording, it becomes so. Is there any small 1 or 2 tips or guidelines there, which are takeaways? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That is such a good question because it's so hard sometimes. I forget it because I do so much podcasting, so I record myself by myself in my room like all the time. So it does get easier, but I do like the idea of having it, like if there's any way that you can kind of like call a friend or maybe even have a friend like on the phone, like say on FaceTime. So here's my phone. I'm gonna put it over here and I'm recording here and I know she's there, so I can kind of work off of her because you're right, not having people in the room is weird. So you probably speak really well when there's somebody who's nodding and saying it, but then when there's nobody there, it's very different. So that's one recommendation. The other thing that I find very helpful is writing it down, but not in paragraph format. So big bullet points, maybe even like a poster board where you know that so I'm holding this up, but like, I put like a big poster board or just a sheet of paper where I have my bullet points there, so that I know that I'm covering them. And so if you get caught up in the and if you have it right there to look at, then you can get to your next point. I've had some clients who actually line up stuffed animals, like from their kids and dolls and animals, and just having those faces. I know it sounds silly, but just having that little round faces looking at you can be helpful, and it can also make you smile. And smiling is, we haven't talked about that yet, but and you don't have to like, do a big grin, but just smiling with your eyes. People can tell if you're kind of, you have energy. So those 3 things can help you when you do things like that. But definitely, you don't want to write everything down, but having the points in front of you, I know I need that a lot, is having my main points. I usually rarely look at them, but having them there makes me feel better.
Yeah, that's nice. Especially those toys. I think I'm going to bring them from my
Oh,
son's
good.
room.
I love
Thank
it.
you so much.
Thank you.
There are other 2 things actually. First is, of course, because talking to a blank screen is very weird at times, actually, for many of us would do that. In fact, when we started doing that, in fact, I personally started doing this LinkedIn live events. Originally, LinkedIn does not allow you to do an event, actually. It's always a third-party platform. So, in fact, now this event, what we are having, I don't even do LinkedIn live event. It's just a LinkedIn is being used to propagate. And we give like Zoom link where you can come in, there is an interaction with people, so there are questions, that's why it becomes more productive. But if you, so there's one way to do it, but still if you have other challenges, if you feel, you can use a teleprompter also if you feel that will help you out. There are online teleprompters. You don't have to write down the whole script per se, but yes, it does have certain tips where at least it will keep your eyes glued to the screen. Let's put it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good point. Yeah. So I think with the teleprompter, sometimes not putting a script in, but putting the questions in. So that it can come up, what is your name? You can say, my name is Sarah. And then the next question comes in so that you're like interacting with the teleprompter. That's just a way to use the teleprompter. I've done that before.
And there are beautiful teleprompters now which can allow you to kind of make it more interactive. There are people that pop up, and what Sarah is saying that, they will kind of ask you questions. So there are all tools and techniques available to make you more comfortable. And even for Zoom meetings, there are teleprompters where you are glued to the screen and they appear as a transparent texts also. So just, we can talk more about it later. But yes, these are the ways if you really want to go towards, if that is a challenge. But no matter what, I mean, from an EB1 perspective, again, coming back to the point, the first thing is you need to be, kind of really be good at your field first. So there are two ways. One is this, all this is paraphernalia. This will always help you. This will support you, aid you. But fundamentally, if you have to be an expert in something to be communicate something, there is no substitute, no teleprompters, no stuffed toys, no pictures can help you. So that's fundamental. So Dikshit.
Yeah, so one question I wanted to ask was, it becomes easier if we invite a host onto a podcast, right? And is it necessary to have only the audio form, or having a visual form and keeping it on LinkedIn is more than enough for the podcasts?
So let me just make sure I'm clear with your question. You're saying, is it okay to, do you have a podcast?
No, I'm planning to start one, but do you need to publish it on Spotify, or like, does it have any kind of use, and do we need to take extra care on how we talk so that people who are going to only listen to it will have like it'll be easier for them also to understand what you're trying to communicate?
Yeah, so, and I think you asked earlier about video. So you definitely don't need video. I know a lot of podcasts are going to video, but I think just having the audio version, you do have to have like a host, like meaning the software to kind of distribute it to all of like Spotify, all the streaming companies. So there's a lot of different steps to getting that podcast started. But I think it's a really, really great way, to get your, to talk about what you want to talk about on a platform that's pretty low. I mean, it does take work at first to get it established, but it's definitely a great place to get started. And no, I would not worry about video because that's a whole other level of podcasting.
Also, the mic piece is important. Like, do we need to invest in a separate mic piece, or the mic of the laptop will be more than enough?
I think investing in really good a good mic, and when I say really good, I mean you could spend maybe $100 on it, and it would make a big difference. The quality of audio is going to make a difference. Nobody wants to listen to bad audio. Nobody wants to hear, all of it. And that's why I say focus on audio first. Maybe if you get good at podcasting, you add video, but there's nothing better than listening to, good quality audio. It's like you might have great content that it'll be lost if you don't record it well. So yeah, I would definitely invest in a good microphone, but if you have your laptop, you have a mic, that's all you need to get started.
Wonderful, Sarah. Okay, we have Arjun now.
Hey, hi Sarah. And my question is, I recently applied for a TEDx speaker in a TEDx Cape Canaveral in May, and but they have a limitations of audience of 100. But whereas another TEDx event in UCF, it has a 1500 seats. So what is the different types of TEDx events, and what kind of precautions we have to take when we speaking in front of limited audience, when we speaking in front of more number of audience?
That is a really good question, even just in the TED world. So you mentioned there's probably that the conference that you mentioned with the 100 limit, it's probably kind of a well-curated little event versus, I think you said UCF. What university is that?
University of Central Florida.
Oh yeah, okay, here, so in Orlando, yeah. And I'm familiar with that one and University of Florida. They're both huge because the university is typically footing the bill for that, and they also want to open it up to students. So they open it up like these huge audiences, huge auditoriums. So those are they're very different events than kind of a smaller city-based TED event. They're usually just kind of like talk, you know, they have talk after talk after talk, and then that's it. A lot of times, especially at the one that I'm most familiar with, which is TEDx Jacksonville, they have engagement. So between the talks, they engage the audience, they can talk with the speakers, there's a lot of networking going on. So I think doing your research when it comes to finding that TEDx event is very important because they can vary. Some have huge budgets and some have tiny little budgets. And it also depends on their theme. So sometimes they may have a very particular theme that would really fit your, you know, your talk, your brand. So you want to look into that. But there's so many of them. It is, I do acknowledge that it's kind of a big task to do the research, but that's the difference between an academic one and a city one. So like a university or a college will have a bigger one because they open it to students. So it's going to be a different kind of audience. You'll have a lot of students in your audience.
Wonderful, Sarah. Shah.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah and Ranjeet, for doing this. Great insights. I'll keep it quick. So luckily with my role, I get to do a lot of thought leadership, but that thought leadership is more focused on my company's product, right? So what I'm trying to ask here is, how can I use those sessions from a thought leadership perspective for my application? Like, is that the correct way to look at this, or should I be also tapping into like TEDx talks, doing local events? Like, just trying to understand, like, how can I use it for the application? Is that the right way to move forward?
So yeah, I think when it comes, thanks for the question. That's a good one. When it comes to TED, it's a very generic, think of it, it's a generic stage. It's a generic venue for you to bring your unique ideas, right? So when it comes to preparing your material, I would encourage you to not try to be another TED speaker because the TED organization is always looking for something new. That's how they survive and thrive as a company. They are always looking for cutting edge ideas and a new story. So they are looking for your unique contribution to the world, right? So whatever you're doing at work, whatever you're doing, you know, in your own personal research, that's going to be an asset to the TED organization, to the TED stage. I wouldn't, yes, it's nice to look at this, like that little 5-minute talk we did in terms of like getting your message across. That's great. But whatever you're preparing in your field, I think could be an asset to a TED stage.
Makes sense. I think, Shah, I would like to give you, take your question at a very broader level. And you are talking about you are doing something for the company, and then if you are preparing yourself for EB1 and something, let's be mindful of one very important aspect that we always tell our coaching students actually here in the program also, that one of the most essential ingredients between your other kind of green cards and your EB1A is basically your other green cards are pertaining to you, your skills, your expertise, what you have. Right. Now, essentially, when we talk of EB1A, it's about it's not about you actually, it's about what problem you solve and what is the impact factor that you have created and what benefit people have by virtue of your expertise. That's the fundamental thing that you need to answer. And this is importance of public speaking or importance of speaking engagement. And one of the reasons why we are doing this session as a part of EB1A program, I mean, is not something just, okay, fine, there is another, let us understand some new skills, because this is an opportunity for you not only to fulfill a criteria in particular, because there exists a criteria called showcase, you can try to leverage that. Right. But also this becomes an opportunity for you to take your skill set, your expertise to the outer world and to communicate for them, communicate to people. Right. Now, if you look at TED Talks, you could be a software engineer, you could be an app developer, you could be a machine learning, you could be an artificial intelligence expert, you could be a finance specialist, yet you are doing this not from a technical perspective. Being technical is a knowledge and a skill. Right. Okay, but fundamentally, you have to reach out to other people for their benefit. It's not about you. EB1A is not about you. You have to understand. It's not about you trying to get it. It's about what you can do for others. So fundamentally, it becomes an opportunity. So look at from that perspective, and everything will flow naturally then according to you. So Chandra.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ranjit.
Yeah, sure. Chandra.
Yeah. Thanks, Ranjit and Shara. A very interesting session. I have a question on, as a new podcaster, right? How do I attract audience, and what are the avenues where I can get audiences for my podcast? Because I'm new to it, for example.
Yeah. So you're a new podcaster. Do you mind sharing what your topic is?
Definitely, it will be on cybersecurity, governance, risk, compliance. It's a boring topic.
Okay. Yeah. So and I ask for the purpose of answering the question, because it's a great question, but it totally depends on the answer to that question is customized to every podcaster, because I think your audiences are in different places. Your audiences could be on LinkedIn, they could be in your network at work, or you're maybe like where you're cool, but then there's unlimited audiences out there that can be found through places like TikTok, right? Where you're using hashtags to find your audiences. You're just using hashtag cybersecurity. I know in terms of my podcast, I find like what happened at the beginning, it was like kind of like my local people, my friends, it kind of went from friends to friends of friends, and then they would pass it through social media. But then there are particular places online that, depending on, what you're doing. So I have a friend who's really into medicinal mushrooms, right? There's festivals out there. There's whole groups of people who are crazy about mushrooms, right? They're crazy about like medicinal herbs and things like that. So you just kind of have to find your people. There are conferences. So, just going back to public speaking, either attending a conference and sharing your podcast there, or applying to, speak on stage and say, at the end, well, and then I have this podcast. And it's when you have that audience in front of you who they want to learn everything they can about cybersecurity, you're going to get a new listener. So it's really, it's like a new way, like a new age way of word of mouth. It is word of mouth, but sometimes it can go very rapidly with social media if you're in the right networks. It is slow. It's a slow process though, because there's a lot of podcasts out there.
Got you. Sure. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, good luck with your podcast.
Chandra, okay, fundamentally you have to believe one thing in yourself, that out of 8 billion people in the entire world, actually, there at any point of time, considering your expertise, considering your skills, there will be at least a million people waiting to hear from you, learn from you something or the other. So you have to offer every individual, who have reached a certain basic level of competency in his career or his education or something, would have something to offer to the world. Now you have to have first conviction that you have something. And then it becomes much more easy, because I think if you come from a position of a doubt that, well, I am not sure whether people want to hear from me, it will always keep you hold back someone. It will be holding you back one way or the other. So if you have to go a little step back a bit to understand that there is something in the world that you have to give it to people, and it is you owe an obligation to people to reach out to them. It's not for you again. I'm a firm believer of something, whether it is you talk about EB1A Green Card, you talk about your expertise, something, it is not for you. You have an obligation to reach out to them. Now, especially when it comes to your green card also, I always like to say from a point of position of, you should leverage it in a manner that no matter what you do, you owe an obligation. You have, from your respective countries, you have come here on a work visa. Sitting here right now, there are a million people back in your homes who are kind of envying you, wanting to take your position. There might be, look back at yourself. If you are on H-1B visa, anybody here, I mean, look back at yourself when you were 10 years younger, actually. Look at your 10-year-old yourself, actually. Yeah. And look at today. So there would be at least somebody, I mean, you are a source of inspiration for them, and you still are. So if you come from that mindset, because that mindset is also equally important. So that's what I have to say right now. And I think we are out of time, but the last question which has come to me, and Sarah, I'm taking an opportunity. Thank you. Sure, Sandra. Is the fact that what are some tips? I know this is a topic by itself and we'll be covering it. What are some tips for using storytelling techniques to create a memorable and impactful speaking engagement? So we are talking of storytelling techniques.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's always good to have 2 or 3 little stories in your pocket. And by that, I mean, whatever you want to illustrate, whatever you want to demonstrate, even if it comes to just getting caught in an elevator with somebody and you have like 2 minutes to tell them something, they're going to remember a story, right? So in terms of like crafting that story, you want to have characters, meaning you want to have actual names, even if you don't want to use the real names. You want to have a setting. So when it comes to like somebody says, well, give me an example of that. Give me an example of something, that happened to you when you were younger. You want to be able to say, that was the afternoon I met Jesse in the coffee shop. And oh my gosh, the most embarrassing thing happened. And then you have a conflict, right? Just like you may have learned in literature class. You have the rising action, you have conflict, you have good characters, you have a good background setting, but you want to have we want to know who the characters are, what the stakes are, what the conflict is, and how it was resolved. So if you can think of that like just very basic, once upon a time, there was a girl, this bad thing happened to her, and this is how she got out of it. And you can use that template for a lot of different things, but having just a little story, a couple different stories that demonstrate what you want to get across, and just kind of practicing those over and over again is really helpful. But you're right about this being an entire session. Storytelling is a big thing, and it seems like these days everybody needs to be a better storyteller.
Absolutely, that's wonderful. And even I think when we saw the monks podcast, that session, as well as the session, one of the very important ingredients is that even he in the beginning, I think, started a quote with Swami Vivekananda and then quote from some scriptures. Then you have to begin with something more than yourself. So even if you're talking about a technical part, let's say you're talking of machine learning and data intelligence, you can create a story about it in terms of solution. You can talk about some code on data engineering and data this thing. I'll start with contradictions.
Yeah, and Ranjeet, I just wanted to address real quick, Letha, she had said earlier in the chat, I think she wanted to know about she wanted to know how brief the introduction was, and this speaks to what you're saying, and that is, don't try not to do too much of an introduction, because it's a lot more boring for me to say, hi, my name is Sarah, and this is my background, and this is I got my bachelor's here, my PhD there. Nobody wants to hear that. But if I start with a story, if I start with, an interesting fact or statistic, it's going to be a lot more interesting. So that's a really good point. So I just wanted to address her question because I don't think we got to it.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Sarah, for sparing your time with us. It has been really brilliant and wonderful for us to know. We are looking for your more sessions in our program, and we'll be in touch with you. And thank you very much, friends, for joining us today on a Saturday morning or afternoon. And have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend for each one of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.